bonjour, bonjour. It is so delightful to be here this evening, and I am accompanied by the ever notorious Dr. Varden. Bonjour, Medell. How are you?
Well, I am doing quite well. Still in
Amazing.
beautiful Arizona, nice and sunny, a little bit
Yeah,
cooler than other parts of the country, but I love having the sun. Better
I would
than
imagine.
snowstorms and ice storms, that's for sure.
Toronto's been going through it. So in Toronto and the region surrounding, we had an incredible ice storm this past weekend, and then a huge snowstorm yesterday, and like snowstorm accumulation, and then today it went up to 20 Celsius. I don't know what that is in American, but it's been seesaw weather. Absolutely incredible. If there's anyone here from Toronto, please let us know. And my moral support, because going from 0 to 20 is very violent on the body.
Oh, absolutely. And talk about it stressing your mitochondria.
Oh, look at you and your segues. I love
I'm trying to connect all of this stuff. I mean, come on.
I love that you're just trying to focus me. Stop complaining about the weather, Christy. You gotta focus. So why don't we talk about our happy little mitochondria and how they contribute to our life? Yeah. So I think when you and I were chatting about this,
Yeah.
as we were getting ready for this, I think we started off in a conversation, to me, at least, that was really interesting insofar as before we even dive into how does the mitochondria contribute to longevity and wellness,
Mhm.
you and I got into it about, well, what exactly is longevity? What exactly is aging? Because I
Yeah.
think this is one of those things that, like, I'd love it if you're listening this evening, toss your definition of aging into the chat. Because I would imagine this evening so far, we're almost 200 people. And I bet if every person responded, we probably have 200 different definitions of aging. Because scientists are still kind of coming to terms with how do we define aging? So, Dr. Varden, let's start off by talking about this. When we talk about longevity, when we
Mhm.
talk about aging, other than the idea of I want to live well and I'd prefer delaying dying, what exactly are we talking about? What is aging other than this avoidance of death?
Well, I mean, when you consider just like a standard definition of aging, it's the gradual, progressive decline
Yeah.
in biological functions and the body's ability to adapt to metabolic stress that leads to increased vulnerability in disease and death. Now, I mean, the thing is, it's like the new phrase of today is inflammaging.
Mm,
And I have listened to so many podcasts and
yeah.
interviews and doctors and biohackers and everything talking about this. And I'll tell you that the underlying thing that I am finding is the inflammation part. It's like, oh, well, we're all aging. And it's like, we go to the doctor's office and we're having these aches and pains and women's hormones and all these other things. And well, it's the aging process. It's just part of life. Well, in a way, yes, it
Yeah.
is. But I don't think that we have to be subject to the speed rate or as strong of an influence of that aging, which honestly I think is just cumulative inflammation. Because
Mhm.
we've talked about this, in other webinars, that inflammation is the foundation of the majority of all chronic conditions.
Mhm.
And I think it's just as we live on this earth, as we are exposed, to toxins, to stresses, to all of these things that increases our aging. And it also um, works on our mitochondria, the ATP output. Because when
Mhm.
you really start, working in how does the mitochondria work with aging and with inflammation?
Yeah.
Well, just the straight out mitochondria being the energy producers of the cells, they make ATP. Well, that energy production declines. It actually drops around 8% per decade after age
Mhm.
30.
Yeah.
Ouch. It's like,
That's
okay, so
especially given
there's
that
an
it's
aging
cumulative.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And why does that really matter? Well, reduced energy impairs tissue repair, organ function, accelerated fragility, and we're going to be diving into more of this, specifically into the genes that influence mitochondria function, health, and in different aspects that how our body is affected in that process.
Yeah, yeah. So you're really, when you talk about aging, your view is really the root cause of it is inflammation, and it is the inflammation that creates an environment with which body functions effectively start to fail. And by fail, I would offer, I mean, lose resiliency, lose ability to actually function and take place. Right. So your comment, I've seen a lot in the chat of people commenting on like weak bones, right? So we know that we, especially when you're younger, have the capacity to add to the bones and to make them stronger. And so you're saying over time, with inflammation and the breakdown of that ability to make bone strong, the aging, at least in the instance of the bone, is the loss of the ability to add to and maintain that bone.
Yeah, it's really disrupting that beautiful homeostasis,
Mhm.
having that nice balance. And balance is not a noun, it's actually a verb because it's an active process, to have that. And when there's any disruption on that, you know, that's where, things start to go awry because there's so many different processes, there's so many different, um, you know, uh, compounds and
Yeah,
pathways and enzymes and everything that gets affected.
yeah.
So,
And and it's possibly also too why you see so many things that contribute to aging. There's not just one thing,
right.
right? So for example, I think of my mom, right? Hi mom, if you're watching. She doesn't usually join, but hi. um, I remember as a child when I grew up, people would always comment, "Oh my gosh, your mom looks so young," even though she was the same age, if not older, than a majority of people. And as I've watched her age over the years, she's maintained that. My mama is oh, she might slaughter me. And mom, I'm so proud of your age and I'm so sorry. And please don't kill me. My mom's over 70 now. And I promise she looks like she's 60. And that's not cosmetic surgery. That is the genes and the mitochondria she was gifted from her mother and from her grandmother. Right. And so there's so many different influences, or you think of, I remember, you always see those before and after photos. One that sticks in my mind is like the photo of Barack Obama before and after his presidency, right? He goes in looking a young 30 and leaves looking an old 70. I'm exaggerating,
Right.
but it's not so much that his genes have changed, it's just that incredible stress. And so really life adds to that aging process and to how genes are expressing, right?
Yeah. And that right there gets into that stress. What does
Mhm.
stress do? Increasing cortisol, increasing inflammatory markers, increasing, the damage that
Mhm.
happens to our cells, tissues, organs, our body overall, where we lose that homeostatic, that balance.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
That so
Yeah, and so you were telling me, and I think this is so interesting, that there's a lot of different mechanisms for aging. So for example, stress is one. For example, there's going to be some genes that we're going to talk about. And then there's diet, nutrition, all that fun stuff, exercise. An independent factor of aging is the mitochondria and mitochondrial health. Do you want to tell our audience a little bit about that? Because to me, that's so interesting when we're able to take this very big, vague concept of aging and dying and then pull out things that are very specific: stress, mitochondria, diet, etc. So talk to me about the mitochondria, because to me, that's really cool.
So, I mean, really, recent advances in our understanding of mitochondrial function has really revealed very critical connections between things like genetics that we're going to be touching on, obviously, that energy production, that aging process. And it's so interesting that in the foundation of aging, first of all, mitochondria contain their own genome. It's called MT, a small MT for mitochondria DNA. This exclusively comes from the maternal line. And it encodes very essential components for the respiration of our cells, meaning the respiration, it uses oxygen, glucose to make ATP, that, the energy currency of the cell. And unlike nuclear DNA, which is the DNA that's in the nucleus of the cell, okay, that we all think of, okay, that we test and measure and report in our DNA 360, mitochondrial DNA lacks protective components called histones that help with repair mechanisms. And it makes it really susceptible to mutations. And it is due to those mutations, that's one of the main processes that underlie the decline of mitochondrial function associated with aging. And, these mutations then can translate where they impair glucose metabolism, cognition, okay, brain function, and ultimately shortening the lifespan. Because yeah, we want to live longer, but I don't want to live longer in decline.
Yeah.
What we normally think, people who are in their 80s and 90s, they're, in a wheelchair, just, Alzheimer's or some sort of, nobody wants to be like that. And my heart goes out to those, who have family members or themselves are going through it, because I myself, my grandmother, actually both of my grandmothers, passed from cognitive decline, Alzheimer's. So the thing is that there is mechanisms in the mitochondria that happen with that, due to those mutations. And there's actually some recent research that has suggested that age-associated mitochondrial DNA mutations are not primarily caused by damage accumulation, but rather by expansion or proliferation of mitochondrial DNA replication errors when cells will proliferate, when they split and make more of them. So if you have mitochondrial damage, okay, and a cell, just like DNA damage in a cell, okay, if it does not get fixed and it is allowed to split, repair, and now break up into 2 cells and into 4 cells and into 16 cells, etc., it is proliferating damaged DNA, whether it's nuclear or mitochondrial.
Yeah.
And that actually is that dysfunction is now recognized as a hallmark of biological aging.
Yeah.
And it occurs independently of chronological age. And that was from the 2025 study, by the way. It just came out in January.
I want to give our audience a little bit of an analogy here. Okay.
Yep.
So think about mitochondrial DNA as kind of instructions of how the mitochondria makes cookies, right? Cookies are the energy, cookies power me, right? And so every time you're making cookies, every time your mitochondria is making energy, it's going to follow a set of ingredients, right? But what happens if you're in a dirty kitchen? That recipe is going to get butter and grease and whatever else on it, it's going to get smudged up. And so if you're not keeping your kitchen clean, that recipe is smudged and it can't be properly replicated, which means you get bad cookies, which means you don't get good energy. Did I catch that properly? But talking about cookies?
And you keep, making those cookies, they're going to be a little
Yeah.
as they go. Or if your recipe, someone comes and changes your recipe and you're making these cookies and they changed a half a teaspoon of salt into a half a cup of salt.
Oh, Lord.
Guess what? Those cookies are not going to be tasting too good, but
Yeah.
yet they're continually to be made the wrong way.
Yeah.
And, the fact that mitochondrial DNA mutation has a 15-fold higher rate than nuclear DNA mutation. And that's high.
It's huge.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, when you're talking about, the mitochondrial capacity for its function, for the work that it does, it affects your ability to exercise, to think, to move, to repair, to do all of these things, because the
Yeah.
mitochondria does way more than make ATP. Way more.
I feel like all our science classes made us into sleeper cells, that if you ask, what is the mitochondria? Everyone replies, the powerhouse of the cell, with awareness that that's a little bit old now. Like we need to update that understanding. We need to expand that sentence to include it also influences the immune system. It also influences cell to cell communication. Yeah, so I want to dive into what our genes can tell us about our mitochondrial wellness, and if we know our genes, how we can support, especially if we don't have the strongest genes. But before we do that, we ask some survey questions.
Whole question. I
Um,
was just going to jump into that.
Look, I beat you today. I feel so
You
special.
did.
For our
I'm
audience, we care about what you want to learn out of this. So we always ask survey questions, but also for our audience, Dr. Varden's always on top of things, whereas I'm a little less on top of things. And so the fact that I won today, I'm gonna give myself a gold star.
gold star.
Thank you. All right. So let's look into our survey. So we asked, what's the age range of people here? A majority, wonderfully, beautifully, is 50% of our audience is over 65. Hello and welcome. Our next category is just over 55. This evening, I want to celebrate. We have someone who here is under 25. Thank you for coming and learning with us. You're a happy little exception to our rule. And we're grateful that we get to share across different generations, because I think everyone pulls in this information differently. So thank you for being here this evening. We next asked, what symptoms have you experienced that might be linked to the mitochondria, right? As I'm reading through different chats and as I'm reading through questions that are already being submitted, I see a lot of people with interest in long haul COVID or other long chronic conditions. And so I imagine you all are already aware of how the mitochondria will play into that. And so, unfortunately, a majority of our audience, about 70%, is expressing fatigue and low energy, which, as Dr. Varden talked about with the cookies, right? Mitochondria is not working, you're not getting your cookies to be energized. 50% brain fog or memory issues. And then some smaller percentages around muscle weakness, especially for those with long haul, slower recovery from workouts, and just frequent illness or inflammation, unfortunately. A very beautiful 14% of our audience said none of the above. And I hope that means none, but if it means we didn't capture something, please do toss it in the chat. We next asked, what are you most interested in learning today? This is important to us because we want to serve you. And we have a beautiful smattering here. So I think the top three that are roughly tied at about 25% are asking about boosting daily energy, slowing the aging process, and preventing chronic disease. So I'm excited. I think, Dr. Varden, the genes that we discussed that we're going to jump into, I think serve each one of those ends. So I'm really looking forward to kind of that gene discussion, right? So people can understand their genes and then how they might want to be a support to them. The last question that we have here is really saying, what do you do for your mitochondria? Okay, because there's a lot of things that can be done to support it. A beautiful 61% of our audience exercises. Hat tip to you. 75% take supplements. I'm curious which supplements. I've seen a few in the chat. A beautiful 64% is sleeping. We, Dr. Brennan and I, jointly love that answer. We're huge advocates of sleep. 40% of our audience is fasting, and then 6% is doing other. For those that are doing none, welcome. We're excited that we hopefully get to educate you on this. So with the awareness of people want to learn about energy and preventing disease and improving mitochondria, Dr. Varden, where do we want to start from a genetic perspective? What genes can we look at that really tell us where the weak points and vulnerabilities, or conversely, the strengths of our mitochondria might be?
Well, when we're talking about the genes, first, we do need to understand what function the mitochondria has outside of just making ATP, which we'll get into. But like you said, everybody knows that. We learned that in middle school, high school biology. Okay.
Sleeper cells. Yep.
Yes. So a lot of you had already mentioned when we're talking about cellular signaling Okay. It is that hub. It actually regulates calcium homeostasis for muscle nerve function. Very important. Produces reactive oxygen species as signaling molecules.
Mhm.
It can directly communicate with immune cells with specialized, somatic junctions. So, because you had mentioned about immune, yes, no,
Yeah.
speak. Did you want to add something?
No, I love that you're raising that the mitochondria makes reactive oxygen species, or something that more commonly is known as oxidants,
Mhm.
because I think most people hear this word and they're like, "Oh no, get away from me, devil." And there was a period in kind of supplementation trends where people overdid antioxidant supplements and actually did damage to themselves. So I love that you're highlighting that a properly functioning mitochondria within balance and reason is creating something that most people are, for some good reasons, but also for
Mhm.
deleterious reasons, scared of.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you consider that they are sensors of the
Yeah.
cell.
Hmm.
They are constantly looking out, going, okay, what needs to be done? What's going on in the cell?
Yeah.
Does it need more energy? In which case it makes its ATP. Oh,
Yeah.
is it infected with something we don't want? Something got in the cell that's
Yeah.
not supposed to be there. Well, then it wants to trigger autophagy or a
Yeah.
programmed cell death, because
Hmm.
unless first it will try um, to destroy it with
Yeah.
lysosomes and different things, and pathways that it will actually release inflammatory markers. Okay, so that way they can try to take care of it. But if that is not working, it will trigger for a programmed cell death, or that
Yeah.
mitophagy and autophagy. Or say it's like, oh, wait a minute, the cells and the tissues, and we're getting information saying we need more energy, and for all the mitochondria that are in this cell, there's not enough. We need to make more mitochondria so that way we can make more energy, in which case that's mitogenesis. So
Yeah.
all of these things, I mean, it really is an absolutely brilliant, elegant, just incredible thing.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
is so important because it is what gives us, the energy to do all of those things.
Yeah.
If we stopped producing ATP in our bodies, we'd be dead in 3 seconds,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? And if you consider that your brain uses up about 20% of all the ATP in the body, and it's only
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
2% of all the weight of the body.
Yeah.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
very, very energy intensive organ,
Yeah.
your brain.
Yeah.
Um, so what the reason why I got into some of the other functions of mitochondria, and specifically had mentioned reactive oxygen species,
Yeah.
is because, like you had mentioned, most people, think, oh my gosh, reactive oxygen species, this is a really bad, horrible thing. And oh my gosh, we want to
Yeah.
get rid of it. Well, yeah, it has a purpose. Okay. But we
Hmm.
don't want it hanging around too long.
Yeah.
And so we
Yeah.
want that clearance. And this is where the gene SOD2 comes in,
Hmm.
superoxide dismutase. And the SOD2 it encodes a critical mitochondrial antioxidant enzyme.
Hmm.
And that represents a very primary defense against oxidative damage within the mitochondria. So it's like, yeah, again, it's actually, you were the precipitous of this analogy
Oh, my kitchen?
of the dirty dishes.
Yeah.
Yes. you know, that you can think of these oxidants, these
Yeah.
reactive oxygen species that cause cellular tissue damage, etc. Dirty dishes piling up on the side of the sink. So those are oxidants. Well, SOD2 is our dishwasher.
Yeah.
You're taking that dirty dish, making suds, the suds being hydrogen peroxide. Again, a byproduct
Hmm.
that can be very helpful because it does help to kill um, uh, any kind of pathogens or anything inside the cell, and the lysosomes and help to clear them. How quickly are they cleaning those dishes? The
Hmm.
speed of which directly affects the health and function of the mitochondria.
Yeah. Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, I think you're touching on a really important part because to me, SODS, this representation of how personalized interpretation of one's genes really, really does matter, right? Because again, if we go back to this dishwashing analogy, right? Dr. Varden's really getting at two different genes, two different enzymes that support cleaning the dishes. One that does that sooty phase and one that does that rinse phase. And part of the disconnect in some people's bodies, right, is when these two are not in balance, right? When you have one person who's really, really quick at like washing dishes, and then the other person who's slow at rinsing them off, you get this buildup of hydrogen peroxide, which is detrimental. Conversely, maybe you have a misbalance insofar as the person actually washing the dishes is really slow. So you're getting this big piling up of dishes, right? This is where I think the really personalized interpretation comes in, right?
Mhm. Okay.
Alongside the ability to really understand what are the body's needs. Because Dr. Varden, when we were talking about this gene beforehand, we were talking with SOD2. It's a tricky gene in that, we know science has a belief right now that it's investigating that we think we know the best presentation. We know the presentation that creates a lot of this SOD2 enzyme to deal with all the oxidants, right? We know that um, we want more of that. That said, in certain disease conditions, having more of that actually isn't helpful. So there's this element again, it's this very elegant encapsulation of there's an element of what's going on in your body, and that will change the interpretation and how you want to be supporting a certain gene. But for the purposes of this conversation, by and large, Dr. Varden, assuming there's no major pathology or issue within the body, what is a good presentation of SOD2 when people are looking at their DNA 360s? Ideally, what form or what presentation are they looking for?
So SOD2, we would see the C allele as working faster enzymatic reaction, and a T allele being a bit slower of that enzymatic reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, it's not this clear cut, discrete thing as you have alluded to.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the actual measurement of the amount of enzymes present,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so many different things going on, and what is it doing, and what other comorbidities or what issues does the person have. And this, I will reiterate what you had said, that this is where the personalization comes in, because
Mm-hmm.
this gene does not exist in a vacuum. It is a pathway, and it interacts and affects so many other different pathways. But in our reports, in the anti-inflammatory report, you will find it under antioxidation subreport. And there's the two genes, SOD2, which is manganese dependent, manganese being that, ion that is attached to it to make it bioavailable, make it function the way it's supposed to. And the other gene is GPX, the glutathione
Mm-hmm.
peroxidase, because it is what then takes, for your analogy, that suds on the hydrogen peroxide, rinses that sudsy dish to clean it off, and converting the hydrogen peroxide into oxygen and water. Yes.
I love that you brought up manganese, in part because I think when people, and this is to the end of people who want supplementation advice. I think whenever we talk about the mitochondria, right? Most people who are kind of well read in the biohacking space, they'll be like CoQ10, quercetin, NMN, right? They'll rattle off very trendy things. And I love that you just brought up manganese. So manganese is a mineral, it's a trace mineral. It's something that when you're consuming food, you don't want a lot of. It's not like magnesium, you don't need bushels and bushels of it, but you do need trace amounts every single day. And when you look at long haul COVID, when you look at chronic disease, one of the things that is most depleted in these populations are trace minerals. And the mitochondria, manganese and a few others, zinc, magnesium, there's a few other trace minerals in there, one of the first things that's dysregulated and inhibitory of the mitochondria actually working, right? Be it a SOD pathway or a few others, is the lacking of trace minerals. Okay. So, I mean, as fancy as you might want to get with some of your supplementation regimes, and we can talk about that a little bit, remember your basics. Remember the good food that is on your plate that will offer those trace minerals, because I promise without the manganese and amongst a few others, the CoQ10s, the NMMs, the quercetins, etc., to an extent are useless. I don't want to dismiss them. They're really important, but they rely on support, and that is your trace minerals.
And I want to point out, just as like a side note, that we focus on SOD2, that manganese dependent enzyme located in the mitochondria, where it protects the mitochondria DNA and protects from oxidative damage caused by these ROSs, etc. But there are two other SODs, SOD1, which is a copper zinc dependent enzyme. That's primarily found in the cytoplasm of the cell. So if you have your cell and you have the nucleus where the DNA is, it's in this other area inside that cell. Okay, that's where SOD1 is found, and that plays a key role in neutralizing, superoxide radicals that occur during cellular metabolism. Okay, within that, inside the environment of the cell itself. And then there's also SOD3. That's also a copper zinc dependent enzyme, but it's found outside of the cell, what we call extracellular, and protects against oxidative stress in the extracellular matrix and plasma. Okay, so cell, everything on the outside, that milieu, okay, and that is extracellular. So there are three SODs, but we are focusing on the one in the mitochondria, which is SOD2. So I didn't want people to get confused and be like, oh, wait a minute,
No, I love it. And for those that are really interested, kind of like the level of nerdy that Dr. Varden is, and I say that as a high compliment, Medell. I highly recommend you kind of Googling all the SODs, because it really produces a fun, like, just chain of where all the minerals and where the CoQ10s and all the things of the world. And you look at this picture and you're like, of course the mitochondria doesn't work. It's confused by itself.
yeah.
So for mitochondria, right, we're talking through, right? So we just kind of talked about SOD, right? And SOD, kind of this idea of you want balance. Ideally, you want that CC presentation, sorry, CCTT. I always mix up the letters for this one.
Oh, yeah, the CC
CC,
would
yeah.
be fast, TT would be slow.
Ideally, CC, there are some instances where you might want a different one. If you're someone who's either in active or inactive cancer, right, you might want to consider a personalized interpretation. Cancer really kind of flips that sort of stuff on its head, as well as your trace minerals. So, Dr. Varden, I wonder if we move on to the ever notorious FOXO3. Yeah.
Yes.
So this was
So,
originally positioned as the, if you have this gene, if you are amongst the blessed and have a G allele, amongst the gods and have two Gs, it's the longevity gene. You're going to live forever, right? Think of FOXO3, G as in God. Those are the ones you want. So talk to me a little bit about this longevity gene and what was unmasked, like what exactly FOXO3 does.
okay, so FOXO3, you'll find this reported in your longevity report in your DNA 360. And FOXO3 is considered a longevity master regulator. Okay. And it's been identified as one of the few consistent longevity genes across diverse human populations, as you've already alluded to. And for this, the FOXO3 SNP, okay, it demonstrates one of the strongest genetic associations of human longevity with its protective G allele, which you've already mentioned. And it's linked to enhanced stress resistance and mitochondrial health specifically. So when we are looking at it, the G alleles, okay, so we have in your report, like if you have a GG allele, we say superhuman longevity. And actually, there's a 2.75 times odds of extreme longevity versus those with the baseline risk, or baseline allele, of the TT.
Mm-hmm.
It lowers TNF alpha levels by 13%, reduces inflammation. You get better telomere maintenance by 15%. Telomerase activity, which is the enzyme that helps to put the telomeres back on for that regeneration. So, I mean, yeah, that it does quite a bit of stuff.
Yeah. And it does a lot of stuff very specific to the mitochondria. I think to me, it's really interesting that in stress states, FOXO3 is very active in not only the support and to an extent protection of the mitochondria, but also the mitochondria rising to the challenge of dealing with whatever stress it is. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because to me, there's a lot that's fascinating to me. I don't want to overuse that phrase. I just find tonight kind
Yeah,
of
no,
fascinating.
actually, when we're talking about metabolic reprogramming,
Mhm.
okay, FOXO3 directly affects what we call the C-MYC. Okay, so what does that stand for? It's cellular cytomatosis oncogene. It's a gene that encodes the c-MYC protein, which is a transcription factor involved in regulating the expression of numerous genes that control cell growth, division, metabolism, apoptosis, some of those things that I've talked about already earlier about what the mitochondria does. Well, it's through this particular pathway in this gene. So the MYC name actually originates from its discovery and studies of avian bird myelocytomatosis virus, where it was identified as an oncogene. And for those people like, oncogene? An oncogene is a gene that can cause cancer when it is mutated or overexpressed. So earlier when I was saying about how there can be mutations in the
Mhm.
DNA and it will proliferate mutated. Well,
Mhm.
anytime that you have your stop gaps, those checkpoints of cells proliferating and splitting and making more, and it's not going, oh, wait a minute, DNA was not fixed here. There's a problem. We need to either repair or we need to kill the cell so that way that damage doesn't continue on.
Yeah.
When that doesn't happen and we are having cells continue to proliferate to make more and more and
Mhm.
more with this damage, that is the definition of cancer,
Yeah.
that unchecked proliferation of
Yeah.
cells. So the c-MYC is a master switch of the cells that
Mhm.
controls how fast they grow and divide.
Yeah.
And it's responsible for turning on other genes that help make energy, build, new parts, multiply.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you can think of it like an accelerator pedal in a car,
Yeah.
okay, where the
Okay.
c-MYC is active and it speeds up the cell growth and energy production. Well, if it gets stuck on that on position, like a jammed
Yeah.
accelerator, it can lead to problems.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it reminds me of the phrase allegro non troppo, fast but not too fast. That's what you want. We don't want it just
Put your
allegro,
music.
fast
Yeah.
and going, all the time, because you're going to burn yourself out. So that's one of the ways that it works on
Yeah.
the mitochondria and the stress of the cell.
I kind of hear it like a feedback like friends almost of the mitochondria, right? You know how sometimes you have friends or family that are watching you and they're like, you may want to reconsider what you're doing. You're doing too much or too little of this. So having a really favorable FOXO3 presentation to an extent is kind of like having a really good friend who cares about you and will call you out when you're being extra or tell you to rise to the occasion if you're not being extra enough. Is that kind of a fair gloss at it?
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, again, going back to the car, if you are putting pedal to the metal
Yeah.
constantly, you're going to burn out your engine.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't want to do that. You need to stop every once in a while. You need to let the engine cool down. You have to put gas in your car. You need to change
Yeah.
the oil. You need to,
Car stuff.
change the tires. Exactly. And that's what we need to do is again finding
Yeah.
that balance. And I'll tell you, it is a verb and you constantly have to work on it. I know I do every day. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's
I
not an
think.
easy thing. But a couple of the other things when we're talking about, the stress, these control mechanisms, uh,
Hmm.
it's something that it also collaborates in a way with the sirtuins,
Mm.
the enzymes that also have been associated with longevity. Dr. David Sinclair, he's famous for this, and he's done a lot of research and publishings with sirtuins and sirtuin upregulating factors and things. And I actually did work on that for my PhD.
Oh,
So
thanks.
yeah, so, I mean, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
So because that collaboration with the sirtuins really helps to maintain the mitochondrial gene expression
Yeah.
and really works into that ability to have the homeostatic effect of stress, yes, but
Hmm.
stress to make it better,
Yeah. Yeah.
not
Yeah.
overdoing it.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you're practicing something and you have that coach, right? Like you have to practice in order to get the place, but you want that coach feedback of do more of this, do less of this, because then you're not building up bad habits, right? You're not building up a whole bunch of far too many cells that you don't want that should actually be taken out into the trash. Just like you want to know that you're reproducing and doing enough, creating enough energy, right? It's that friend, it's that coach that is really guiding that process. And so if you are amongst the blessed, right, you have that G allele kicking around. um I wonder before we transition into our questions and answers, because I see a whole gaggle. I think there's a lot of people here, especially from that chronic illness side of things, because we know chronic illness really jumps in and dysregulates how the mitochondria is functioning and how it's getting nutrition. Um, why don't we talk about our last gene that we wanted to focus on and offer a little bit of an announcement around it too? Do you want to start into UCP1?
Absolutely. So, UCP1 is actually a gene that affects thermal regulation. And this can impact mitochondrial efficiency, energy expenditure. And this is a gene that, when it comes out, a little spoiler alert, the A allele is the optimal allele, where the G allele is the suboptimal allele. And it really works into your ability, to have that thermal regulation. And it works into the body's ability to build brown fat, which
Mhm.
actually helps burn more calories at rest. Babies have a lot of brown fat. Birds
Mhm.
have a lot of brown fat. I mean, they're little. You figure, how do they survive in the winter? It's the
Yeah,
brown fat,
yeah.
So, and we want more of that because we want to be able to be flexible in our body's ability to adjust in more varied temperatures, which I know you do not like the cold at all. You'd much rather be
I loathe it. And there's a
hot.
lot of people from Toronto that are feeling the violence of the past few days. So welcome to those that are surviving. But
But honestly, we live in these boxes, in these temperature controlled environments to the point where our mitochondria has gotten complacent. They're like, hey, don't have to do that much. I don't have to put out that much energy for heat because it's not changing.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
like, I want my mitochondria to be on the ready that no matter what I'm in, they're like, okay, we're ready. We'll react. We'll do
yeah,
what we need to do.
yeah,
So
yeah.
and this is the you know precipitous idea of cold plunges of, like Wim Hof, okay, the Iceman, and how he puts himself into extremes and climbs Mount Kilimanjaro in a pair of
Yeah.
shorts, okay, and is fine, and he can teach that.
Yeah.
So, and it also helps with our immune system, which we've already talked about in the very beginning, how the mitochondria affects the immune system. So having that ability for the dynamics
The
of your
thermal
body to
flexibility.
adjust to
Yeah.
a wider range of temperatures
Yeah.
is very,
So
very useful.
the interesting thing about UCP1, so really what it's saying is it's a protein that is attached to the mitochondria. And when you have a certain configuration, a certain way that protein is built, right, it makes the mitochondria a little bit more leaky to fat. So this is what Dr. Varden was talking about with the brown fat, right? If you have this large amount of brown fat, it's creating this warmth for you. So you're constantly having to feed your mitochondria a little bit more to create that warmth. And so your resting metabolic rate, right? Effectively, how many calories are you burning in order to keep your body chugging is going to be higher. And you have a lesser propensity towards storing this as fat, right? Because when you're not releasing that heat, where's that energy going? That energy is going to be made into fat. So this is a gene that really speaks to how is your mitochondria supporting some of this, right? Very specific to this heat versus this fat building. Okay. And so again, I would offer there's no bad presentation of this, right? I think we in North America nowadays, because we have such access to food, we don't like the idea of putting on fat. But once upon a time, for our ancestors, where food was not as plentiful, right? Having this capacity to store the fat, right, is very, very helpful because you didn't necessarily always have access to it. So for
You
those
know,
that are, oh,
I
yeah,
would
yeah.
like to mention before we jump over, because I think that this gene also provides so much information. And I know, we were kind of ending on the UCP1, but the clock gene and
Mm,
sleep.
mm,
I do want to mention that the relationship between circadian rhythms and mitochondria function is increasingly being recognized as critical, because that circadian clock regulates key aspects of the mitochondria, including oxidative phosphorylation, mitochondrial
mhm,
biogenesis, mitochondrial morphology, the shaping, and shape equals function.
mhm.
Okay, so it there is evidence that has shown that clock gene mutations result in smaller, more fragmented mitochondrial morphology, and therefore a loss of rhythmic changes in that mitochondrial structure. That leads to diminished mitochondrial respiration, its ability to make ATP, decreased ATP, but also elevated reactive oxygen species production.
Mhm.
So, it goes to tell you that to know your clock gene and to be able to support the foundations of good sleep will directly affect mitochondrial function, which affects everything else.
Everything. I feel like
Sorry.
between you
I
and
didn't
I,
mean to
whenever
step
we
on your
host,
toes there, but I wanted to make sure to mention
no,
that.
it's okay. It just makes me laugh that whenever we host a webinar together, we almost always come back to the statement of please go to sleep and it's going to help you.
Well, it is
Now,
foundational.
before we jump into our questions and answers, you did allude to something, and I just want to make sure our audience has complete context. We have on the App Store, or the Android equivalent of App Store, I forget what that's called, we've released something called the DNA Way app. And this is an app where if you have your DNA 360 or even 23andMe results, you can upload them and then you can see our interpretation of your genes. And so for those that are really interested in their UCP1 presentation, in the app, we will be releasing that gene. So if you have your results with us in the coming weeks, there's not a go live at this point in time, but soon we will be releasing that. So for those that are really interested in UCP1, get the app, and in the coming weeks, you will be able to see your status of it. Mhm. All right, doctor. Shall we shift into questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and before we do, just a shout out to Trudy who said hello to my cat. That was Napita, and she runs the show. One of two. All right. Um, Sandra Lee is asking if there's transcripts available. We do post our webinars for viewing, and I believe you can turn on closed caption. There is not a transcript that is available separately, so hopefully the closed caption supports what you're looking for. Anne has our next question. Okay, so this is very specific to long haul COVID, and she's asking for what are specific medication strategies that support long haul COVID. And so I want to offer just a few contextualizing factors. So with long haul COVID, there's a lot of evidence as well as emerging evidence, i.e., we know the mitochondria is very involved, and evidence keeps compiling as to saying how extensively it is. That's why when we get on webinars like this, we always get these questions about long haul COVID because so many people are struggling with it. So Anne's asking the question of, should I consider LDN? Should I consider ivermectin? There's other solutions. And so what I would say, Anne, is all of these might be something that are applicable to you. I would offer that every case of long haul is unique. And so it's really difficult to say this solution versus that solution is strong for you. And so we are launching something called or a long haul COVID support program. So close, so many words this evening. And so that might be something you want to consider. It's not yet launched, but if you want to email CEO at the DNA company, we can put you on a list. And when we do that, launch that program, we can have you for an intake to support decisions like that. I think it would be wrong of us, though, to say this versus that option when we don't know your history, because quite literally every person with long haul COVID is going to have a different presentation, and that really influences what treatment options are afforded to you. Okay. So I hope that was helpful. I don't want to dismiss the question, but it would be wrong of me. I think all of the things you listed are viable and potential, but it's so specific. We want to make sure we get you a good fit there. All right, Dr. Varden, I think Chris has the next question for you, which is, what can we do to help the mitochondria produce energy for us, the best vitamins, supplements, etc.? So, so we have talked about trace minerals. So Chris said encourage definitely trace minerals. Dr. Varden, there's such a long list of supplements that can be used in support of the mitochondria. What is your top one or two? With awareness, we won't be able to do an exhaustive list for Chris.
Well, I will say that I do love methylene blue.
Mhm.
Now,
Yeah,
granted,
no,
methylene
please.
blue is a synthetic compound, but the history of it, I mean, it's been around since the late 1800s.
Mhm.
The research on it is quite profound. Safety profiles. The only thing is that it's not for everyone. There is a particular genetic profile. Oh, it's G something. I'll think of it. That if you have that particular genetic mutation, it's rare. You'd know if you had it, then you should not take methylene blue. But
Oh, is this the G6PD?
yes, thank you.
You're
Yes.
welcome.
And then obviously those who might be taking SSRIs, that's something that you do have to speak with your doctor about. But outside of that, it's wonderful for energy production for the mitochondria because it actually helps as an electron donator where it works on as I know this getting kind of nerdy, in the mitochondria, there are four complexes that, these electrons and the protons go through to create the gradient in order for, ATP to be produced. Well, it really helps with complex four. So if, say there's damage, which is rather common in complex one or two, it can actually bypass that and help with the energy production. Also helps to upregulate oxygen uptake in red blood cells. And actually, that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why FDA, and actually it was the first drug that FDA approved when FDA became FDA.
Oh, fun. I
It
didn't
was,
know that.
yeah, it was approved for
Huh.
methemoglobinemia, which actually, well, it's basically where the red blood cells can't
Yeah.
uptake oxygen very well. And your SpO2 levels, oxygen saturation drops way down, which actually happened for a lot of people who got COVID.
Yeah.
Their oxygen saturation went down. So anyway, it's wonderful for that energy production. But I'll tell you, other ones that I think are amazing.
Just
Yeah.
before we move on, I want to offer two comments on
Okay.
methylene blue. So for
Mhm.
G6PD, most people would know this. If you have Mediterranean descent and you have any issues with fava beans, that's one red flag that you probably shouldn't be doing it. But separate to that, in particular, people who have gone through cancer journeys and there's a few other conditions, your doctor would have genotyped this because it's really important. It effectively means that you struggle with having too many antioxidants within the body. So you need to be very, very careful with this. Separate to that, methylene blue, especially with COVID, went through this moment of everyone got really excited about it. And there's a lot of people that try and get it through sources that may not offer you a really good methylene blue. So be very mindful if
Mhm.
this is something that you're going to investigate with your doctor, get it from a really good source. There's a lot of case reports of people getting it off of places like Amazon and it not being a great life decision for them. So work
Correct.
with your doctor. You need to know about your G6PD status and you need to ensure you're getting it from a compounding pharmacy or from somewhere that is a real source versus just some blue food coloring with something else funky in it. So if you want to go on with your
Oh,
next one, yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think it's
oh,
really
no, no, no.
important.
Actually, I think that is really important to understand, because there's so much out there, that is, it's not regulated as well as it probably should be. And they've done outside testing of, some of like the liquids and other things that you'd find on Amazon or some of the others that say, oh, it's this certain percentage and, this is the concentration. And when it was tested with, an independent laboratory, it was far from the concentration that they had said. And if you really
Yeah,
are looking at uh, the efficacy to get the benefits that it truly has, and there's a lot of research on it,
yeah,
you want to have something that is independently tested, that is
yeah,
making sure that it is on the concentration that it is. And it can come in many forms. They have troches and, the liquids and different things like that. But
yeah.
I don't want, this to be in
Oh,
there. But go ahead.
I'm going to have a soapbox moment because I think this is really
Yes.
important. I think with the landscape changing in the US, in particular, changes to the FDA, better or worse, I don't have commentary on the better or worse. There's going to be more allowance and autonomy of people who create supplementation to do what they want. There's not going to be as many checks and balances. So it is going to be on the consumer to ensure you are doing your own checks and balances. So a few things. If it's if the price is too good to be true, it is, you're probably going to be getting nothing in it, just rice powder. Okay. The second thing is, I think Dr. Varden made this comment about third-party testers. If you're thinking of getting a supplement, ask the company who are their third-party testers. How do you know I'm getting what I'm paying for? Unfortunately, better or worse, I'm not, no commentary there. Um, it's going to be really important on the consumer to do their own diligence if they're going to be taking supplements, okay? Because certain governmental checkpoints are going to be taken away, if not they already have, right? So the consumer needs to be very mindful of this. Third party access, be mindful of the price. Supplements should be treated like medications and therefore to an extent to ensure the quality, etc., will be expensive. Okay. If you're seeing it everywhere around $50 and then this one person has it for 20, you're probably not going to be getting what you think you are if you're paying $20 for it. Okay. It's unfortunate, but Yeah, there's my
And
soapbox.
I love this, that if someone wants to dive deeper, they can actually look up Dr. Scott Scherr, Sherr. He actually has done some wonderful interviews really talking about this and being very specific,
Mhm.
about the things that you're talking about.
It's
So
important.
which we don't have time to, dive as deep into, but
I've
um,
seen so many people hurt by bad
yes.
supplements. It's so
Oh
important
yeah.
to do your diligence and treat them like medication. You don't go to a dealer on the street and get your medication. You go to a pharmacy. Be mindful of that.
Um, some other things. There is wonderful research that's been done by Dr. Andrew Salzman, Salzman. He's a Harvard MD, scientist, inventor. And I mean, he's been in the field for decades. And I had recently listened to a medical podcast with him, talking about NAD, NMN, NMR. Okay, so NAD plus, well, first of all, NAD helps with the mitochondria. It really helps to, it, in a way, it's energy currency or food.
It's an
It's,
actor.
it is,
It's an
that
actor.
helps mitochondria, and it helps turn food into energy.
Mhm.
And it works into the PARP pathway, which the PARP is like the repair crew that fixes DNA damage, but it needs to have NAD plus to do its job. It needs to have that food. Okay. And normal function for NAD plus, mitochondria use it to make the energy and to manage stress, where the PRP uses small amounts of the NAD to fix daily DNA wear and tear. Because when you have chronic stress and toxins, DNA damage skyrockets. The PRP that goes into overdrive, it burns more, burns through more of the NAD plus reserves. And so mitochondria get starved of NAD plus, and therefore energy production plummets. I mean, it's like, this domino effect. So again, wonderful research that has been going on, to help upregulate NAD, but it's not that you take NAD directly, because it doesn't quite work that way. It's better to take NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, or NR, nicotinamide riboside. These are the precursors, kind of like the jackets that go on to
Mhm.
get that into the cell to then be used. But then you also have to consider about CD38, which is an enzyme that cleaves NAD, or the NMN and R, as it gets into the cell. So there's a whole thing. But like I said, if you look him up, brilliant, really important. But we want to upregulate that, because it does affect mitochondrial health. So that's something, you know.
And one thing I would offer too, if you're thinking of NMN, it's an expensive supplement
Yeah.
because it A has to be tightly controlled to ensure efficacy, but
Mhm.
separate to that, just because it can be so powerful within the cell. Dr. Barton just outlined some of the research there. I'd encourage that, especially if you have your DNA 360, looking at some of your methylation pathways. I've seen some people not benefit from NMN, too many letters, in part because, oh, here comes number two, in part because their methylation pathways weren't optimal, and without proper methylation, you're not going to be garnering the benefit from that. So again, if you want to get the supplement and to ensure you're getting value for your money, make sure you know your methylation pathways, and you can happily find those out through the DNA 360 because we have such a beautiful, comprehensive look at those. So
And
cool.
I really
The next,
wanted to jump into some of the oddities, some of the difference, because I mean, really, when you're talking about foundations, exactly what you're talking about, your
mhm.
methylation pathway, we talk about this like every webinar, because it is so ubiquitous. It is so
Yeah,
important. And this
it's
is
like
where your
sleep.
B vitamins come in, so it's like, I wanted, when we talk about the different vitamins that can be helpful for all of these enzymatic reactions and these foundational health benefits, your B vitamins, your magnesium, things like L-carnitine, things like CoQ10, or having the foods that have these compounds in them. It's like we talk about these so much in each of them. I wanted to start off with a little bit of the oddities, that are directly impactful for the mitochondria.
Yeah.
So that's why I kind of
For those
brought
for
it in
those
there.
who are listening and struggling with long haul COVID, talk to your provider about carnitine, acetyl L-carnitine, pivotal in recovery, especially mitochondrial support. That and your trace minerals, you're partway there. Yeah.
Yeah.
All
And I
right.
mean, there's more and more research that
Yeah.
comes out, because
Yeah.
this even answers some of the other questions. Can mitochondria be repaired? Yes. Yes, they,
Yes. Yeah.
and this is what we're talking about through these different ways, having these compounds in the foods that you eat, having the supplements and, other dietary lifestyle
Hmm.
changes, having phytonutrient rich foods, the dark leafy
Yeah.
greens, cruciferous vegetables, berries, antioxidants, healthy fats, okay, staying away from fats and
Yeah.
that cause inflammation, or foods that are highly processed, and sleep hygiene. You wanna
I'm sorry, what
forget
for the people in the back?
sleep.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit away from supplements.
Yes.
Marianne is asking a question here. Any thoughts on red light therapy for the mitochondria? Dr. Varden, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I love red light therapy. And go figure, red light therapy in conjunction with methylene blue, if that is indicated for you, actually has a multiplicative synergistic effect, because with methylene blue, because it reflects the blue, it absorbs the red. So, taking it before red light therapy, and then having the red light therapy, it actually increases that energy production and mitochondrial functioning,
Mhm.
combining the two. But absolutely, red light therapy shows very strong potential for enhancing mitochondrial function through a lot of different mechanisms, really.
Mhm.
Boosting ATP production, that mitochondrial biogenesis I was talking about, where,
Yeah.
it will actually create more mitochondria, because we want the young, healthy ones, getting the senescence. We got to, break it
Yeah.
down and clear them and recycle.
It's anytime I think of and hear about red light therapy, I'm always amazed that it really harps back to that place where humans as organisms first evolved, right? When we were first on Earth, it was really light. Like this is a throwback to, where evolution has brought us. And it's really speaking to it's not just vitamin D. There's so many elements of our body that still require natural environment, right? Because while the world has markedly changed in 100, 200 years, our bodies aren't necessarily there yet. Yeah.
A couple other things, as far as the red light therapy,
Hmm.
does help reduce that oxidative stress. Red light therapy actually lowers it by dissociating nitric oxide from the cytochrome C oxidase, which restores oxygen's potential and role in that ATP production. But something that many people may not know is that it actually helps restore membrane potential. Now,
Hmm.
what exactly is that? Um, the mitochondria, the membrane, kind of think of our skin, okay? It stabilizes that membrane. And when I say potential, it's because of your negative and positive ions. It creates this a, a, a buildup, okay, of where you have more, positive, or more negative on one side than the other, and that creates what we call a potential. All right, and what happens is that near infrared light stabilizes mitochondrial membrane, preventing proton leakage, which helps to improve that energy efficiency.
Hmm.
And a lot of people don't realize that it does that. So there's so many different benefits that red light therapy can have. And I mean, there's a lot of clinical benefits, with chronic
Hmm.
fatigue, neuroprotection,
Yeah.
diabetes, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was one of those therapies first birthed out of, I think, cancer care. And it's proving so supportive, especially for just any chronic illness, right? Cancer is really being shifted into a chronic illness. D'accord. Our next question is from Robin, who asked around spirulina and sod. Did that disappear? Hold on. Oh, there it is. Okay. Oh no, that disappeared.
What disappeared?
The question disappeared.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see Robin's, the other two sods don't seem to
Mm.
be representative on the
Oh
DNA.
no, it's okay.
Was there
All
another
right.
one?
There was.
Oh,
Um, Yeah, so I guess Robin has two questions then. So Robin, correct.
okay.
We only focus on SOD2 in our DNA 360 because we have found that, at least based on our research to date, to be the most clinically actionable one. As more research comes up on the other, in the sense of we can find SNPs that truly differentiate people, we might incorporate those. But for now, SOD2 is what we examine. And she also asked after spirulina. It's really saying that there is a form of sod within spirulina. Is that true? And so, yes, there's an iron-based form of sod within spirulina. It is something that, while I can't comment per se on how much is absorbed and how effective it is, meaning if you ingest 100 of those iron-based sods, does your body use 100? I can't comment on that. But clinical study does show that it does have some antioxidant impact within people. So for those that are struggling with chronic illness or might be going through an acute period of inflammation or oxidative stress, it could be part of that plan. And I love kind of spirulina sort of sea friend adjacent things because they come really rich in other minerals and phytonutrients. So it's a beautiful thing to be thinking through as part of a plan. Just check with a practitioner there. Yeah. Dr. Varden, let's
Mhm.
see. Um, what's the next question here? I see one. I know that this is close to your heart, so why don't I offer you the question from Chantel? Um, can inhaling hydrogen help with mitochondria?
Um, I I know that it can help with acting as an antioxidant.
Mm,
Um, the and I mean, I would say maybe not, well, they directly. Um, hmm. She also has about with direct sunlight on the eyes while the eyes gets closed for sunlight exposure. Okay, so let's think about this. So of course you've got to be careful with gaseous hydrogen because don't have a flame around. We don't want the Hindenburg. You do have to be very careful with that. Um, but generally, when there is hydrogen, it's usually hydrogen water that makes it more stable. So, I mean, it it does help with mitochondrial reactivation,
mm.
through different pathways. Um,
I
but
think it gets at a point that I think you were making a little bit before, in that there's an element of, if you reduce some of the oxidative stress on the
yeah,
mitochondria can then function better. So
yeah,
to your
it's
point, we
not
don't have direct science, but
right,
it helps the general milieu.
right. Yeah, because it's not that it's there's at least as far as I know, there's no direct you know, uh, implication. It's more or less, hey, these uh, they scavenge these hydroxyl radicals, okay, that, which is the most damaging ROSs, reactive oxygen
Mhm.
species there are, that can preserve the mitochondria, but it's more of like an indirect way. Um, so as far as the other question, I believe it had something to do with direct sunlight. Um, I would say that really works into the clock gene. Okay. Working with metabolism and circadian rhythm. All right. So that morning sunlight exposure. I would not recommend looking at the sun directly during the full day. I
Yeah.
know that sun gazing is, popular in some circles, but very specifically the time of day that that is done, and it is
Mhm.
only at sunrise and sunset. So not when it's high in the sky, because you don't want to be damaging your eyeballs. Um, so, but when it comes to sunlight exposure, that does help to increase that mitochondrial biogenesis through the vitamin D, pathway synthesis, and that does help to regulate the clock gene for you know optimal circadian rhythm. So, and of course, that also can work into the red light because that improves retinal mitochondria function,
Mhm.
actually boosting color sensitivity. So, there's
Yeah.
more direct evidence of sunlight exposure than the hydrogen gas, which I probably would not do.
Yeah. Um, So for Jennifer's asking a question. I love this question because it kind of again brings us back to that general thing that's not directly impacting mitochondria, but how do we offer general support? Jennifer's asking, what is the connection of long time gut biome, kind of a dysbiotic or an upset gut, poorly functioning gut, and mitochondrial health? Does a compromised gut prevent mitochondrial improvement? Um, the answer is nuance, but to a degree, yes. Right. And I think this really goes back to the general stress, wear and tear on the body. The greater that is, the more you're going to be asking of your mitochondria. Right. And separate to that, again, going back to those trace minerals and going back to the things that will feed your mitochondria and ensuring it has all the actors there in order to move forward. So, would I say, does a bad gut mean you can't improve your mitochondria? I don't think that's a fair statement, but I would say improving the gut really increases those chances. And I think you can do both in parallel, right? Yeah. So,
Yeah, and I do want to mention, especially when it comes to LPSs,
mm,
lipopolysaccharides, which are metabolite compounds that are toxic to our body, that certain uh, gut biome produce more of. Okay, um, that there is such a thing as LPS induced mitochondrial damage, because what happens is you get an overproduction of the reactive oxygen species. And this is from gram negative bacteria. Um, so, I mean, when you're talking about, yeah, can a dysregulated gut, cause issues and affect the mitochondria? Yeah, it can. But thankfully, just like, what Dr. Kosterman was just saying, it doesn't mean that you can't do the things to help repair mitochondrial function, but in concert, you need to help fix your gut. So let's not climb that mountain with 100-pound sack on your back full of rocks. Okay. Dump the rocks out. Then you can climb the mountain.
yeah. All right. Anne has our next question. So, Anne's asking, if you have the MTHFR gene, what is the best supplement for your mitochondria? Other than glutathione? Ooh, this is a loaded question. I love it.
Yeah.
Dr. Varden, if you're okay with it, I'm going to jump into this one.
Yeah, please
So,
do.
and to answer your first element of MTHFR, I'd really encourage you look at your full DNA 360. I think there's this thought that MTHFR is the standalone gene and you prescribe on that gene alone, and that is not true. Methylation is a really long process, and you need to look at several genes within the process. So if you're looking for something for MTHFR, I'd really look at your SHMT1, which is in your DNA 360, and that can really guide it. When you have that report, it will tell you what form of folate amongst a few other vitamins are going to be optimal to supporting that. Okay. And the next thought here is around glutathione. Oh, mitochondria. I'm so glad we're talking about this. So, for glutathione, there's this idea. So, glutathione is possibly one of the strongest antioxidants that the body has. Okay, it's this happy little thing that goes around, it finds oxidants and it neutralizes them. Now, here's the thing. We look at genes, GSTs. I think these might be Dr. Varden's favorite family of genes. And our
Mhm.
GST genes really speak to how do we attach glutathione to something, okay? If you have a poor presentation of these attacher genes, right? Remember that there's an element of regardless how much glutathione you have, the rate limiting factor is going to be this attachment, okay? So meaning if you're taking a lot of glutathione supplementation, especially if you're doing IVs, which are really popular for chronic illness and beauty, right? There's an element of if you can't attach things very well, your body isn't going to need or isn't going to be able to make use of that. Now, the devil works with idle hands. If you get this huge influx, especially IV of glutathione, okay, and you're a poor attacher, again, your 360 will tell you this, you don't attach very well. This very, 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 very strong antioxidant is like, cool, I have nothing to do. I better find something to do. And what have we said, Dr. Varden, or what have you said today that has a lot of oxidant and antioxidant activity? It's the mitochondria. And so your glutathione, this excess, this unnatural amount will actually go into glutathione or the mitochondria, sorry, and disrupt it. Okay. So be mindful of, again, supplements. This kind of goes back to our soapbox conversation. Not every supplement is for everyone. So be mindful of what you're putting in your body because not everyone will respond positively to glutathione. And there's going to be some people it's actually deleterious to in it for that window to their mitochondria. All right. Dr. Varden, I think Yvonne has a question for you. I hope you've read it because I haven't. Do you want to offer Yvonne's
Oh,
question to us?
yeah, she's asking her high quality supplement provider inadvertently sent her a product called ATP 360 by Research to Nutritionals. Is this any good? Can you suggest anything else? Honestly, not real familiar with that
Okay.
product. I mean, there are
Yeah.
so many products out there.
Yeah.
While you were talking, I did do a quick search on the ingredients that it included. And it includes things like CoQ10, PQQ, arlipoic acid, NADH, phospholipids. These are all key ingredients that do help to support mitochondrial health, ATP production, mitogenesis, oxidative stress reduction. But as far as the quality of it, the efficacy of it, again, I'm not familiar with that particular product or company, so I really can't say that compared to others. But it has the right ingredients, but how quality are they? That I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah.
And sorry, I couldn't be of more help there.
No, I think that was very helpful because I apologize. We just kind of tossed you a new supplement and you're like, here, do a quick analysis of it. And I think you did a spectacular analysis of it. And I would also offer Yvonne, be very careful that anytime someone sends you something like here, it's for free, remember they're sending you a medication. So you need to ensure it's an appropriate medication for you, right? Just because you have it doesn't make it appropriate for you. All
I
right.
I want to take this next one.
Please.
It's because it's Susan Davies asking about the thoughts on hydrogen machines, breathing hydrogen directly from mitochondria support. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I know I kind of made it sound like, oh, don't do that at all. And I don't want to say that because I mean, there is research going on
Mm-hmm.
with hydrogen, whether it
Yeah.
be uh, you know, hydrogen water or gaseous hydrogen. Yes, it can do some work, but the research is still coming out. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the fact of just the theoretical, the fact that it's a selective antioxidant, it neutralizes those hydroxyl radicals, how it can stimulate the PGC1 alpha activation and these other things that I'm not going to dive into right now. I don't want to say, hey, it's definitely not a good idea. What I'm saying is there's a lot of things that you could be doing that might be less expensive, maybe initially more efficacious.
Yeah.
You want to clear the muddy waters first. You take care of that
Mhm.
low-hanging fruit of making sure that you've reduced your toxic exposure, that your environment is good, that you've got clean water, clean air, clean food, that you're sleeping, or at least
Yeah.
doing the things in your power for these foundational items, having the foods, doing those things. And then, okay, once that's cleaned up and you're still having issues, then you can kind of turn the smaller dials.
Yeah.
Is this something that you want to put your money into? So again, I don't want to necessarily dismiss a particular therapy. Um,
Mhm.
so that
I
that
think that's beautifully put. I think there's some emerging evidence for the gaseous state for long haul. But again, I think to your point, there's also a lot of other pieces of evidence for other things that we definitely know are efficacious. So it's an element of how much energy and time. I think that was a beautiful answer, Dr. Redden.
yeah, and I really think it should be done with professional guidance. You know,
Mhm.
again,
Yeah.
this you really need to be followed by someone.
Especially with long haul, where we know cognitive function is to a degree compromised between fatigue and brain fog, right? Yeah. All right. What is the relationship between mitochondria health and Alzheimer's? I think I'd almost offer there's a bit of chicken and egg here, right?
Yeah.
There's a bit of chicken and egg. Yeah, yeah. Because as Dr. Varden's articulated, over time, you're naturally going to lose function there. But then we also see exceptional compromise in people who have Alzheimer's. And so is it one that begets the other? That's still tricky. But I would offer, I think offering mitochondrial support can I don't think we have enough evidence to say slow or retard. Sorry, retard is in the late French mix-up, but slow or lessen impact of Alzheimer's. But I think in general for health outcomes, any interventions meant to support mitochondria tend to be positive towards the end of Alzheimer's care. Yeah. Anything that I missed there? I know you're spectacular in your Alzheimer's details. It's a general question, right? It's a chicken and egg
Yeah.
question to
I
me.
mean, really, it is the early energy deficits, where you've got this mitochondrial biogenic decline.
Mhm.
Really what we're doing is it's basically the reduction of the energy of the ATP production. You know, that occurs before, amyloid plaques, tau tangles, that have been found in mouse models. But then again, there's new research that has come out saying, there's actually more to it than that. And maybe they were just players that
Mhm.
were found at the scene of the crime, but were being blamed for it. Just
Yeah.
like, saying, oh, firefighters are usually at fires, so they're the ones who caused the fire. And it's like, really?
That's a good analogy. That's a good analogy. They're
So,
associated too, but not causative thereof.
right. But it's still the fact that mitochondria, lower function of the mitochondria, um, they they found that lower mitochondrial function in skeletal muscle correlates with increased dementia risk,
Yeah.
lower brain
Yeah.
ATP levels, which is why exercise is so important for
Yeah.
mitochondrial health, for overall
Yeah.
health. And I know that's
Yeah.
something that we talked about before we even started that was
Yeah.
really important. So, guys,
Yeah.
if you want to help your mitochondria, exercise, move your bodies, okay?
Mm,
Sleep, moving.
all the things. All right, Lorraine has a question. I'll grab this one. So she's saying from nutritionists, she's gotten warnings to avoid carnitine due to arterial sclerosis risk. What is the current belief? So a lot of that was birthed out of initially kind of pre-supplementation. A lot of carnitine would come from meat, and a very meat-heavy diet in the wrong context would increase arteriosclerosis risk. It's a lot of syllables, effectively increasing heart disease, right, and cardiovascular issues. And so is there truth to that? Yeah, poor diet straight up is going to create that. And meat, oftentimes, especially in North America, tends to be the proxy for that. Because in North America, when we talk about a very meat heavy diet, really we're talking kind of a lot of meat, a lot of carbs, and very little vegetable. There's an element of if you're balancing your meat with proper vegetable, that can be done in a very good and healthy way. So there's an element of context to that, but separate to that, and this is very specific to long haul COVID, but in general, certain many chronic conditions, right? Acetyl L-carnitine is very much within that biochemistry, that creation of energy within the mitochondria, and specific to COVID, specific to long haul COVID, that is shown to be dysregulated. And supplementing with that with a provider who can monitor it properly, give you the proper dose, give you the proper cofactors, it can be a really strong support. Okay, so I would say, Lauren, it's an element of context, and it's an element, especially if you're ill, working with the right provider who can kind of offer that tailored solution for you. Be that with us, especially since we're kicking off that long haul program again, reaching out to CEO at DNA Company. We'll get you on that wait list if you want to consider it or hear of it when we go live. Dr. Varden, senolytic activators.
Yes. Okay. So senolytics, first of all, if a lot of people may not know, they are compounds that selectively target and eliminate senescent cells. These are basically dysfunctional, what we call zombie cells that accumulate with age. They contribute to chronic inflammation, tissue damage, and those age-related diseases, which we're trying to avoid.
Yeah,
So
this is kind of what we were referring to at the beginning, where we say, your body just kind of stops its resiliency before it could kind of replicate and get rid of old trash. The older you get, the more you struggle with getting rid of the trash. So the senolytics is kind of getting at the trash.
exactly. And really it's a matter of wanting to induce that apoptosis in the cells, like I was talking about earlier. Senolytics reduce harmful effects of these senescent cells, okay? And they promote the apoptosis of these cells, the clearance, the breakdown, and promote healthier aging. So yeah, and there are companies out there that are now that have senolytics. I actually was in an initial study with Qualia, with their
Oh,
Qualia
fun.
senolytics. Yeah.
Cool.
So, I mean, really simple, 2 days out of the month, and really pretty cool.
Really neat.
But
Yeah.
generally, you'll see senolytics. They'll have things like fisetin,
Mhm.
which is a natural potent senolytic found in strawberries, apples. Go for food first. Um,
Or I was going to say not. One of the most natural, best senolytics, assuming it's appropriate for health, is going to be fasting
Fasting.
or
Exactly.
not.
Doing some sort of fasting, mimicking,
Mhm.
anytime that
Yeah.
you can induce fasting. And again, there's products out there that will help to induce a fasting state without necessarily the fasting. I mean, urolithin A, Mitochondria's timeline actually focuses on
Mhm.
that, is one of them. But yeah, just basically don't eat for a little bit. But of course,
If it's
if it's
appropriate, if
appropriate,
it's
I was
appropriate.
just going to say, if it's
I
appropriate, don't.
Fasting is a privilege, and at least in the
Yeah.
Western world, fasting is a privilege, and people need to hear that because I see some people making themselves sick off
Oh
it.
yeah. So and you have to build up to it because that can actually be very beneficial to help your body become metabolically flexible, being able to burn fat for fuel as easily as glucose.
Hmm.
So you really need to work into it slowly, see if it's something that you should be doing, work with a practitioner who can guide you through it, because there's many different ways of fasting, and we've done webinars and podcasts on it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right, Medell, our last question of the evening is coming from Mike. So Mike is saying that he did a food sensitivity test and he had several things registered, dairy, grains, nuts, amongst a few other things that inspired him to be doing an elimination diet. So, right, taking away some of the offending agents. Right, so really saying for 12 weeks, I'm not going to be eating the nuts, the dairies, the grains, see if that helps with things. Could he be on the right track for improving mitochondrial function? Yeah, yeah.
This is
I would say you need to know root cause, right? Sometimes like this could be part of, but not the entirety. But I would offer, if these things are truly bothering your body and increasing that burden and that load that the body is having to navigate, that the mitochondria is having to fuel, as well as endure the damage from the oxidative stress,
Mhm.
fixing that is going to really, really help. And it may also clear the water to understand what is going on, be it a gut thing or if it's outside of the guts.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
when you consider your immune system, the majority of your immune system comes from the gut.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
And having any kind of oxidative stress, um, that's going to cause more problems. But beyond that, nutrient malabsorption. If you've got a
Yeah.
wrecked gut, if there's things going on, those sensitized
Yeah.
foods, or foods that you are sensitive to, impair gut integrity. It
Mhm.
reduces the absorption of the
Yeah.
nutrients you need for all the other processes of your body, so you could be eating like expensive, organic, perfect diet doesn't mean that you are absorbing those very important nutrients from them.
Yeah.
So
I know both of us do this. We work with clients on gut before oftentimes we really introduce any supplements, especially the expensive
yeah,
ones, because you don't want it to be just washing through the body. And so
correct.
that's the why.
you know
So you're on a
and
great start, Mike.
Yeah, and I would also consider, if you do need nutrients or supplements, instead of doing pill form, which again has to be broken down and absorbed through the gut, think of other forms. Any type of liquids that you would hold in your mouth to be absorbed more quickly in the oral cavity, transdermal, vitamin patches, some other uh,
Mhm.
absorptive pathway where your body can utilize those nutrients more readily until your gut is healed more and you can actually obtain those nutrients from the foods that you're eating.
Oui, oui. Wise, wise. They're cool.
Yeah.
I think this is where we come to our end. Our questions have ended, and we're ending strong, I think. I'm so very grateful to you, Dr. Varden, who it's been so delightful to be like, and I'm excited to talk about this, and I'm excited to talk about this. So thank you for nerding out with me. Thank you for helping us navigate the biochemistry and the complexity that is the beautiful of the mitochondria and how it contributes to aging or lack thereof, right? To our audience, thank you so very much for joining us. We're so grateful that you come time and time again. We're grateful for the feedback that you offer in our surveys. And again, I know after these webinars, we do send out questions of like, how are we doing? What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? Please do offer us that feedback, because Dr. Vern and I, we both show up to the end of supporting you guys. And so we want to know how to support you better. So let us know. And I think Medela, it is time for us to dance out.
Yes.
All
And thank
right.
you. Thank you again. I love doing these with you. And thank you so much, everyone, for
Mhm.
showing up here, but showing up for yourself. Age
Mhm.
gracefully, age the way you want to age.
Ooh, yes, ma'am. I love it. And on that note, let us dance as we age. Au
Yes.
revoir,
Love,
mes amis.
love to
Au revoir.
dance.